Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever actually tried to picture a thought? And I don't mean the content of what you're thinking about, but the actual physical mechanics of it happening right there inside your head. It's a wildly elusive concept. Well, today, we are going to embark on a really fascinating layer-by-layer deconstruction of how we visualize the complex mechanics of the human mind. We're looking at a highly specific, honestly, breathtakingly detailed visual model, what we're calling the luminescent architecture of thought. We're going to break down how this totally futuristic representation of neural pathways takes the invisible and makes it stunningly, vividly visible.
Millions of neurons lighting up. That is the core action we're examining today. And I wanted to hit you with this vivid imagery right out of the gate because it draws us directly into the sheer density of what's happening inside the human brain every single second. Imagine, if you will, a dense, sprawling forest in pitch darkness. Then suddenly, millions of tiny fireflies ignite in this huge, synchronized wave. That is exactly the level of intense, rapid-fire activity this visualization captures. It takes the entirely abstract concept of thinking and translates it into this violent, beautiful storm of light.
Okay, let's move into part one, the futuristic laboratory setting, setting the scene for the mind. Let's dive right into this by looking at the environment holding this incredible storm of activity. Because when we visualize something as complex as the brain, the setting matters just as much as the subject. We are placed squarely in this dark, really moody laboratory. This is definitely not your standard brightly lit hospital room with white walls and sterile counters. No, this is a very deliberate aesthetic choice to isolate the subject. By placing this setting right next to the bright blue neural pathways of the brain, we get a total masterclass in visual focus. That dramatic deep darkness acts as a void, making absolutely sure that nothing distracts you from the luminescent architecture pulsing right there in the center of the room.
All right, part two, the luminescent architecture, pulsing pathways of electricity.
So the crucial point is defining what exactly we are looking at here. Luminescent architecture refers to those bright blue, electricity-pulsing neural pathways that literally map out human thought as millions of neurons light up. But notice how this core is actually built. We're not looking at some cartoon or a simplified 2D diagram. We are looking at highly realistic 3D human anatomy. It takes the familiar folds and structures of the brain and transforms them into an active, pulsing network. It totally bridges the gap between organic biology and high-tech machinery. And I really want you to focus on the word active here. This isn't static architecture like a building made of stone. This is a structure built out of active pulsing electricity, making the static anatomy of the brain feel thrillingly alive. It basically turns a biological organ into a machine of pure light.
The way we actually experience this architecture is highly choreographed. Let's break down the smooth, cinematic camera movement and the actions step by step. First, this glowing human brain slowly rotates. And that slow rotation is absolutely vital. It gives us a full 360-degree omniscient view so we can comprehend the organ's full dimensionality. Second, as it turns, the bright blue neural pathways pulse. This pulsing gives the whole visual a heartbeat, a real rhythm of life. And finally, on a super granular level, millions of individual neurons light up in sequence. This step-by-step layering of motion creates a deeply immersive experience. You aren't just looking at a model anymore, you literally feel like you're witnessing a mind in the active process of thinking.
Moving on to part three, digital holograms of thought, visualizing the invisible. Now, what's really interesting about this is how we shift from the physical to the abstract. We've looked at the physical matter and the electricity, but what about the actual cognitive data itself? Well, this visualization introduces medical holograms floating directly around the physical brain. It takes the invisible metrics of our mind, those qualitative aspects of our consciousness, and projects them as readable, tangible data points, just suspended there in midair. We see three specific cognitive functions floating like digital satellites: memory, focus, and intelligence. These aren't just random words, right? They represent the holy trinity of cognitive monitoring in this scenario. By visually tethering these abstract concepts to the physical structure of the brain, this futuristic representation of neural pathways suggests a future where we can instantly, visually measure the very quality of a person's thought process. And that brings us to the core utility of this entire visualization, a futuristic healthcare atmosphere. By projecting these specific traits and combining them with the rotating, pulsing neural pathways, it creates a highly realistic yet completely futuristic vision of how we might monitor healthcare data down the line. It suggests a world where a neurologist doesn't just, look at a flat chart on a clipboard, but actually interacts with a living, glowing holographic map of their patient's mind, reading focus and memory levels in absolute real time. Which leads us to part 4,
Cinematic healthcare aesthetics, the technical canvas. Let's just quickly explore the specific technical specifications that elevate this from a simple medical diagram to a truly cinematic experience. The way this information is rendered completely changes how we emotionally react to it. The medium is honestly just as important as the message here. Elements like 4K resolution and HDR give the glowing blue electricity this blinding, pristine clarity. But I really want to draw your attention to shallow depth of field and realistic textures. A shallow depth of field means the background blurs out, forcing your eye to intimately focus on one specific, ultra-detailed ridge of the brain. The realistic textures ground the sci-fi elements right back in biological reality. Combined with the dramatic lighting we discussed earlier, these aren't just camera settings, they are actual storytelling devices. They make the brain feel mysterious, vital, and incredibly important.
Now look at this number, 9. Everything we've been discussing, the millions of lighting neurons, the rotating 3D anatomy, the floating digital holograms of memory and focus, the 4K cinematic lighting, all of this intense, dramatic detail is packed into a mere 9-second span of visual information. It is an incredibly dense, tightly compressed loop of data that manages to convey a massive amount of narrative and scientific imagination in under a decade of seconds.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate power of this visual concept. A realistic, 3D glowing human brain slowly rotating in a dark, futuristic laboratory. It reminds us that what we're looking at isn't just an organ. By rendering the brain with bright blue electricity and hovering data points, it transforms our very biology into a machine of light. It fundamentally changes the metaphor of the human mind from a fleshy biological computer to a luminescent, truly dynamic architecture.
So this leaves us with a pretty stark, profound question. If our thoughts are visualized as pulsing electricity and digital holograms, how is this futuristic healthcare approach going to change how we view human intelligence? If we can literally see memory and focus hovering as glowing icons, do we stop seeing ourselves as these mysterious souls and start seeing ourselves as incredibly beautiful biological hard drives? It's a powerful modern metaphor for the mind, and exactly the kind of question this stunning visualization forces us to ask. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I hope you never quite look at your own thoughts the exact same way again.